Friedrich Nietzsche said, "Without myth, however, every culture loses its healthy, creative, natural power." In part 1 of The Need for Myth, we discussed the fact that we desperately need myth in our modern world. But the question is, why do we need myth? The reality is we face brutally threatening problems. We face extremely menacing challenges and outrageously daunting obstacles in our modern world, of which I believe is the most imminent and threatening, the one that is knocking on our door the loudest, is ecological degradation. In other words, climate change. We have been absolutely destructive to our environment, and it is finally catching up with us and showing. Climate change is real. It is not a conspiracy. It is not a political agenda. It is a fact, a hardened, observable reality that we must face. And we cannot put it off any longer, no matter how desperately we wish that we could. And I think it is a problem that we need to deal with now, that we can no longer think in terms of the future generations dealing with it. It is a time that we are the future generations. We are the ones who now have to deal with our parents' sins, so to speak. The effects are staring us right in the eye, right here and right now. And the repercussions of our actions and our absolute carelessness, our greed and our naivety are now knocking at our door. The piper has called and we now have to pay our dues. I will be the first to admit that I did not put a lot of stock, effort, or thought into ecological change. That is until I was around 17 or 18 years old. A good friend of mine used to take me to various rivers. We would go swimming, hiking, exploring, looking at nature's beauties. One day we came out into a place where there was a great big bluff, a small little waterfall, and growing all over this beautiful rock bluff was ferns, flowers, and various types of moss, beneath which was a pool of crystal clear water with all sorts of water plants and beautiful fish. It was a teeming little oasis of absolute beauty, and I absolutely loved this place. This was one of my happy places in life. However, a few years after discovering this place, there was a significant deforestation right up the hill from this. Within no time at all, it completely dried up. What used to be a teeming, beautiful little environment was now a dry, lifeless rock with no water, no waterfall, and certainly no plants. It absolutely murdered what was a beautiful little area. Later, I encountered the works of Alexander von Humboldt, who was a German geographer, an explorer, a naturalist, a profound thinker, philosopher, poet, so on and so forth. He was born in 1769 and he died in 1859. And in his explorations of South America, Humboldt experienced ecological degradation exactly as I had experienced it. Due to deforestation, areas were drying up and becoming desert-like, and he warned against this, fearing the dawn of the industrial age and what it would mean to our planet. Today, we are starting to experience Humboldt's fears. We are realizing that he was not a kook, he was not a quack, but he was rather more akin to a prophet. He had logic and reason on his side, and we're starting to see exactly how probing and in-depth this scientific mind actually was. Another cry of warning seemed to be issued by Victor Schauberger. Victor Schauberger was oftentimes scoffed at, sometimes even considered a mystic or a pseudoscientist, but in the early 1900s, he seemed to re-emphasize Humboldt's work, and he made further and more detailed predictions against deforestation. In fact, that seemed to be what he specified in, was the effects of deforestation and how it would affect the overall ecosystem, specifically waterways. Man-made manipulations of nature was something that Schauberger deeply and sincerely was fearful of. And we're starting to see that this fear was not unmerited. Overall, we seem to have neglected our climate. And both of these men from the past did not act on or speak out of political motivation. They did not have some conspiracy theory type agenda. These claims were made in the past without any sort of economic or monetary motivation at all. Not only were they talking out of the past and not without political ambition or financial motivation, but their claims were reinforced by logic and reason. They had noticed observable realities and made claims. And furthermore, they made claims, not outrageous claims, not detrimental claims, not hateful claims, but they simply cried out to warn us, to heed the call and pay attention to our environment. They did this purely out of a love for nature. But today, almost as if there are echoes from the past, as if Humboldt and Schauberger were speaking directly to us in the form of statistics, we are seeing numbers that are absolutely alarming and should shake us all to the core. For instance, in 2021, studies concluded that only 3% of Earth's land is ecologically intact. This is absolutely horrifying. Furthermore, 75% of Earth's surface has been directly altered by humans, and 85% of wetlands have been altered by humans. If you don't believe me, take this little thought experiment into account. Look at pictures of Mount Everest. The peak of Mount Everest, which is the highest place on Earth, reaching 29,032 feet above sea level. And it is absolutely littered with trash. Now, look at Marianas Trench, with a depth of 36,036 feet at its absolute deepest. This is the lowest part of the Earth's crust. And it too is littered with trash. In other words, we have trashed our entire planet. From the highest peak to the lowest trench, it is littered with our own consumerism. 83% of freshwater species have declined globally. An estimated 1 million species will be threatened with extinction in the next coming decade. The real question that we have to face, though, is not are these statistics going to lead to our inevitable end? Because if we do not pay attention and we do not heed the call, they most certainly will lead to our inevitable end. But the question we have to now ask is, can myth help us? And I think that I might have some good news. I believe that indeed myth can in fact help us. Myth seems to offer some form of solution because, along with Darwinism, myth seems to be the singular thought system or mindset that reminds us that we, as a human species, come from nature. In fact, most myths honor nature because it holds nature as a house for us. It is something which we are part of. Take, for instance, the Nordic mythologies. It considers us children of ash and elm, so to speak. And even the Christian mythology, when not taken in its religious form, teaches us that we come from the dirt. In other words, we come from earth. So mythology is constantly teaching that we come from nature, and this is why we see most myths honoring nature. Furthermore, when we're looking at mythology, most deities seem to take on a sort of nature orientation. For instance, let's just look at the oldest known mythological entity or deity, and that is the Green Man, which I intend on writing a book on very soon, and I'll also be doing a video on in the near future. But the Green Man is the oldest mythological deity, and he is a foliage deity. He is a land spirit, a spirit of the mountains, of the forest, of the trees, and he represents aspects of nature, which are, of course, to be honored. Furthermore, let's look at later evolutionary deities. For instance, what I specialize in is the Germanic mythos or the Nordic mythos. So let's just see Odin, for instance, the primary or most notable god of the Norse religion or Norse mythology. He is, of course, associated with what I consider the psychedelic experience, and I'll do a video on that very soon, but he is also a force of nature. He is the muse, he is the wisdom, he is a very human aspect of nature, but in context to nature itself, he is a wanderer, he is a hiker, he is a vagabond or a vagrant in the forest, and he's also deeply coupled with animals and severely integrated with animal wisdom, so to speak. Let's look at Thor, the other primary Norse god, and he is a thunder god. He is, in other words, a god of the storms, and the god of the storms we think is a war god, a brute force god. But in reality, if we actually study historically what Thor represented, it's the fertility brought on by storms. And that is absolutely astonishing that all the deities, all the gods and goddesses of these mythologies seem to have nature orientation, which of course leads us, in other words, forces us to respect and appreciate nature. Respecting nature, of course, is fundamental, but myth also aligns us with nature. It reminds us that we are a manifestation of nature. Much like a wave is a manifestation of the sea, so we are a manifestation of nature. And myth symbolizes the forces of nature and teaches us to be in awe of nature, to respect nature, to look at it with admiration and love. And in myth, nature is the sanctuary, and it is the church. There is no building to go worship in most primitive mythologies. There is no tabernacle. There's nothing that's separated from nature. Nature in and of itself is the sacred place. That is where the gods reside according to mythology. That is where the spirits can be contacted. That is where we can discuss things with our ancestors, the spirits of our ancestors. That is where the preternatural events or the supernatural events really take place. It hails nature not just as nature, but as supernature. And that is where all of our imaginative generations, or generative qualities, in other words, come from, is from nature, because it is a very sacred place in mythology. Religion has taught us to deny nature and to separate ourselves from nature, to be ashamed of nature, and most of all, ashamed of our own nature. It has also taught us to dominate her, to go forth and cover all areas of the globe. But this is why we face such horrors today. This is why we face such catastrophes today. But myth can in fact undo all of this.